The dying embers of the campfire cast long shadows across Quincy Foster's weathered face as he cradled his 6-month-old daughter against his chest. The Montana Territory of 1876 was no place for a man alone with an infant, but that was the hand fate had dealt him. His voice, rough from trail dust but gentle with love, carried a lullaby into the cool night air, the only gift he could offer his child besides his protection. "Hush, little darling, don't you cry, Papa's gonna sing until the stars go by." The words weren't much, but they were his, crafted during those first desperate nights after Elizabeth had passed during childbirth. The cattle lowed softly in the distance. His small herd settled for the night as he continued his lonely vigil. "When morning comes, we'll ride again, across the plains and through the glen." A flicker of movement in the darkness beyond the firelight made Quincy's hand instinctively move toward the revolver at his side. Times were dangerous, especially for a lone cowboy traveling with valuable livestock and something infinitely more precious, his daughter Emma. "Who's there?" he called, his voice hardening as he shifted Emma to his left arm, keeping his right hand free. "Show yourself or ride on." For a moment there was silence. Then a gentle voice, distinctly feminine, continued his melody from the shadows. "Your papa's arms will keep you warm, safe from danger, safe from harm." A woman emerged slowly into the firelight, hands raised slightly to show she meant no threat. Quincy's breath caught in his throat. She was dressed practically in a dusty riding skirt and simple blouse, but there was something striking about her, tall and slender with auburn hair caught back in a simple braid. Her eyes, reflecting the firelight, held a mixture of wariness and wonder. "I'm sorry," she said softly, mindful of the now sleeping baby. "I heard the singing. It's not often you come across such gentleness out here." Quincy relaxed slightly but remained cautious. "It's not often ladies travel alone after dark. You're either very brave or very foolish, miss." "Perhaps both," she said with the ghost of a smile. "I'm Tessa Vaughn. My wagon broke an axle about a mile back. I was hoping to find help before full dark, but—" She gestured helplessly. "You're alone?" Quincy asked, scanning the darkness behind her. "I am now." A shadow crossed her face. "I was traveling with my brother to Virginia City. He took fever 3 days ago. I buried him yesterday morning." Quincy nodded solemnly, understanding loss all too well. "I'm sorry for your trouble, Miss Vaughn. I'm Quincy Foster. This is Emma." He glanced down at his sleeping daughter. "She's beautiful," Tessa said, her voice softening. "May I sit for a spell? I've been walking since sundown." Quincy nodded, gesturing to a spot across the fire. "There's coffee in the pot and stew left if you're hungry." "That's very kind of you, Mr. Foster." As she settled by the fire, Quincy watched her with careful eyes. Trust came dear in the territories, especially when protecting something as precious as Emma. Yet there was something about this woman, a dignity in how she carried her grief, a gentleness in how she looked at his daughter. "You sing beautifully," she said after accepting a tin cup of coffee. "Your own lullaby, made it up after her mother passed," he said simply. "Emma seems to like it well enough." Tessa's eyes met his across the fire. "Children know when they're loved, Mr. Foster. That matters more than fancy words." For the first time in months, Quincy felt something stir in his chest beyond the grinding daily determination to survive. There was something disarming about this woman's directness, her lack of pity when he mentioned Elizabeth's passing. "What will you do now, Miss Vaughn? Without your brother, I mean." She sipped her coffee, staring into the flames. "Continue to Virginia City, I suppose. I have an uncle there who agreed to take us in. I have some skill as a seamstress. I'll manage." "It's still 2 weeks' ride and dangerous country." "I'm aware of that, Mr. Foster." Her voice was steady. "But I've little choice. What's left of our belongings is in that wagon, including money for starting over." Quincy shifted Emma to his shoulder, patting her back gently. "I'm driving cattle to Virginia City myself. Rancher named Sullivan is expecting them." He paused, weighing his words. "It wouldn't be proper. A lady traveling with a man she doesn't know, but it would be safer than going alone." Tessa studied him, taking in the gentle way he held his daughter, the wedding band still on his finger, the honest concern in his eyes. "Mr. Foster, would you say you're an honorable man?" "I try to be, Miss Vaughn." "Then I accept your offer." She set down her cup. "But I won't be a burden. I can cook, I can shoot if needed, and I'm not afraid of hard work." "Never doubted it for a minute," Quincy said, the corner of his mouth lifting slightly. "We'll fetch your wagon at first light. Best get some rest now." As Tessa settled onto the bedroll he offered her, Quincy laid Emma in her makeshift cradle, a padded wooden box secured to his saddle for easy transport. The baby fussed momentarily before settling back to sleep. "Mr. Foster?" Tessa's voice came softly through the darkness. "Yes, Miss Vaughn." "Would you mind? Would you sing again? It's been a long while since I heard something so peaceful." Quincy hesitated, then settled back against his saddle. His deep voice rose quietly into the night, singing the simple lullaby that had become his ritual with Emma. After a moment, Tessa's clear soprano joined in harmony, their voices twining together above the crackling fire. Neither could have known in that moment how those harmonized notes were the first threads of a bond that would strengthen with each passing mile. Dawn broke across the eastern sky in streaks of pink and gold as Quincy rose from his bedroll. Emma was already awake, cooing softly in her cradle. He lifted her, breathing in her sweet scent, marveling as he did every morning that something so perfect could exist in a world so harsh. "Good morning, little one," he murmured, reaching for the bottle of goat's milk he'd prepared the night before. Finding a nursing goat had been his salvation after Elizabeth's death. An elderly Shoshone woman had shown him how to feed Emma this way when it became clear he couldn't afford a wet nurse. Movement across the camp caught his attention. Tessa was already up, quietly adding wood to the rekindled fire and setting coffee to boil. "You're an early riser, Miss Vaughn," he observed. She glanced up, tucking a stray strand of hair behind her ear. "Farm habits die hard, Mr. Foster." "My father believed the day was half gone by sunrise." "Wise man." "Stubborn man," she corrected with a small smile, "but yes, wise in his way." She nodded toward Emma. "She seems content with her bottle. You've managed well." "Had little choice," Quincy replied, testing the milk's temperature on his wrist before offering it to the eagerly suckling infant. "We've figured things out together, haven't we, Em?" Tessa watched them for a moment, then returned to her tasks. "I'll have breakfast ready shortly. Then perhaps we could see about my wagon." By mid-morning, they had reached Tessa's broken-down wagon. It was a modest prairie schooner, smaller than most, loaded with what appeared to be the carefully packed remnants of a previous life. Quincy examined the broken axle with a practiced eye. "We can fix this," he decided. "I've got tools and there's a good sturdy oak we can use for a new axle about half a mile back." He glanced at her. "It'll take most of the day." Tessa nodded, already rolling up her sleeves. "Then we'd best get started." Quincy found himself impressed by her practicality. While he felled a suitable tree and began shaping the new axle, Tessa organized the wagon's contents, created a shaded area for Emma, and prepared a midday meal from her own supplies. "Your brother," Quincy ventured as they worked side by side in the afternoon heat, "was he older or younger?" "Younger. Thomas was 23. Her hands stilled momentarily on the harness she was repairing. "After our parents died last winter, we decided to seek a fresh start out west." He was so full of dreams about Montana territory. "I'm sorry," Quincy said simply. "And your wife?" Tessa asked after a moment. "If you don't mind my asking." Quincy worked silently for several seconds, his axe biting rhythmically into the wood. "Elizabeth. We'd been married just over a year when she got with child. The pregnancy was difficult from the start." His stroke slowed. "Doctor said she wasn't built for childbearing, but she was determined, said Emma was worth any risk." "She sounds like a brave woman." "She was the bravest person I ever knew." He wiped his brow with his sleeve. "We were homesteading in Nebraska. After she passed, I couldn't bear to stay, sold everything except what would fit in my wagon and bought a small herd to drive to market. Thought I'd start fresh somewhere new." And the song, the lullaby, Quincy's weathered face softened. Elizabeth used to sing to Emma before she was born, said babies could hear in the womb. After she was gone, Emma would cry for hours. Nothing I did helped until I started singing, made up the words as I went, but the melody. That was Elizabeth's. Tessa's eyes held a depth of understanding that required no words. After a moment, she simply nodded and returned to her work. By sunset, they had repaired the wagon and were ready to combine their journeys. Tessa's wagon would follow Quincy's, with her driving during the day while he managed the cattle. At night, they would camp together, propriety maintained by the open sky above them, but safety found in proximity. That evening, as they sat by the fire with Emma sleeping nearby, Tessa removed a battered harmonica from her pocket. "My father's," she explained, turning the instrument in her hands. "Would you mind if I played a bit? It helps me feel less alone." "Please do," Quincy encouraged. The sweet, mournful notes of Beautiful Dreamer drifted through the camp. Quincy watched Tessa's eyes close as she played, her face serene in the firelight. When she finished, he found himself wishing the music had continued. "Your father taught you," she nodded. "Music was his joy. He played fiddle at every dance in our county. And your mother," she sang, "like you do not trained but pure and true." Tessa's fingers traced the harmonica's edge. They met at a harvest dance. He always said he fell in love with her voice before he ever saw her face. "Some connections run deeper than sight," Quincy agreed quietly. Their eyes met across the fire, and something unspoken passed between them, a recognition of shared understanding, of parallel losses that had somehow led them to this same point beneath the vast Montana sky. That night, after Tessa had retired to her wagon and Quincy to his bedroll beside the fire, Emma woke fussing. As he began to sing his lullaby, Tessa's harmonica joined in from inside her wagon, a gentle accompaniment that seemed to complete the melody he'd been singing alone for so long. By the time Emma drifted back to sleep, something had shifted. A seed of possibility had been planted in ground Quincy had thought would remain forever barren. The next morning dawned clear and cool, promising fair weather for travel. As Quincy harnessed his team, he watched Tessa emerge from her wagon with Emma in her arms. She had offered to hold the baby while he prepared for the day's journey, and the sight of them together, Tessa pointing out a soaring hawk to the wide-eyed infant, caused an unexpected tightness in his chest. "Looks like we've got good traveling weather," he called, securing the final strap. Tessa nodded, walking toward him with Emma. "How far do you think we'll make it today?" "There's a creek about 15 miles ahead. Good place to stop for the night." He reached for Emma, who gurgled happily at the sight of her father. "She wasn't any trouble. She's a delight," Tessa said, smiling as she carefully transferred the baby to his arms. "She watched me braid my hair like it was the most fascinating thing she'd ever seen." "Probably was," Quincy chuckled. "Not much variety in what she sees day to day. She needs a woman's influence," Tessa observed, then immediately looked embarrassed. "I'm sorry, that was presumptuous of me." "No," Quincy said quietly. "You're right, I worry about that. A girl needs a mother, but—" He didn't finish the thought. They traveled steadily through the morning, the cattle moving at a manageable pace under Quincy's guidance. By midday, they stopped in a small meadow to rest the animals and take their own meal. Tessa spread a blanket beneath the shade of a cottonwood tree, creating a safe space for Emma to lie while they ate. "You handle cattle well," Tessa commented, passing him a plate of cold biscuits and jerky. "Were you always a rancher?" Quincy shook his head. "Grew up on a farm in Ohio. My father raised horses, taught me everything about livestock. When I came west, cattle seemed the practical choice. There's good money in beef if you can get it to market. And after Virginia City?" "What then?" He considered the question, watching Emma bat at a wooden rattle he'd carved for her. "Haven't thought that far ahead. Find somewhere to settle, I suppose, somewhere Emma can grow up safe." "You're a good father," Tessa said softly. "I've seen how you look at her like she's the most precious thing in the world." "She is." Quincy met Tessa's gaze directly. "What about you? Beyond Virginia City, what dreams are you carrying?" Tessa was quiet for a moment, her eyes distant. I thought I knew once, a home of my own, children perhaps. Now, she shrugged. Now I just want to find solid ground again. You will, he assured her. Something made him reach across the blanket, briefly touching her hand. You're stronger than you give yourself credit for, Miss Vaughn. The contact was brief, but both felt it a current of connection neither had expected. The afternoon's travel was uneventful until they spotted a plume of dust on the horizon behind them. Quincy reined in his horse, squinting against the sun. Riders coming fast, he said, his voice tense. Could be nothing, could be trouble. Tessa shaded her eyes. 3 of them, I think. Get Emma and take cover in your wagon, Quincy instructed, his hand moving to the rifle slung across his saddle. Stay down until I call clear. Tessa gathered Emma without argument and hurried to her wagon. Quincy positioned himself between the approaching riders and the wagons, waiting with outward calm and inward vigilance. As the riders drew closer, Quincy could make out 3 men, rough-looking and trail-worn. They slowed their horses as they approached, taking in the small herd, the wagons, and the lone man guarding them. Afternoon, called the lead rider, a heavy-set man with a thick beard. Fine day for traveling. Fine enough, Quincy responded evenly. Something I can help you with. The man smiled, though it didn't reach his eyes. Just passing through, friend. Wondered if you might spare some coffee and conversation. Been a lonely ride. Coffee I can spare, Quincy said carefully. But we're looking to make camp before dark. Not much time for visiting. The second rider, younger with a pockmarked face, leaned forward in his saddle. Thought I saw a woman with you. She's shy, Quincy's expression hardened. My wife's resting, baby's been fussy. The lie came easily, a protective instinct he didn't question. The bearded man's eyes narrowed slightly, assessing. Whatever he saw in Quincy's stance made him reconsider. Well, we won't trouble your missus then. That coffee would be welcome, though. Tessa, who had been listening from the wagon, understood Quincy's strategy. Emerging with Emma in her arms, she called out, Quincy, dear, is everything all right? She moved to stand beside him, playing the role of wife with natural ease. Good afternoon, gentlemen, she greeted the riders, her manner polite but reserved. The bearded man touched his hat brim. Madam. Fine child you have there. Thank you, Tessa replied, positioning herself so that Emma was slightly turned away from the strangers. Quincy dismounted, keeping his movements casual though his senses remained alert. He built a small fire and prepared coffee while maintaining sight of his rifle. The 3 men dismounted, but kept a respectful distance, seeming to accept the narrative of a family traveling together. As they drank their coffee, the men shared trail news reports of increased military presence near the Yellowstone, rumors of gold findings near Virginia City, warnings about a band of cattle thieves operating in the territory. Best keep a close watch on that herd, advised the youngest rider, a quiet man who had barely spoken. Travelers have been losing stock between here and Virginia City. Appreciate the warning, Quincy said, refilling their cups one final time, a signal that hospitality was concluding. The men took the hint, mounting up with murmured thanks. As they prepared to ride off, the bearded leader paused. You folks be careful. Man traveling alone with his family makes an easy target for some. His eyes met Quincy's with an unspoken message. Might want to make it clear to anyone you meet that you're not to be trifled with. With that ambiguous advice, they rode away, leaving Quincy and Tessa to exchange troubled glances. Were they warning us or threatening us? Tessa wondered aloud once the riders were well beyond earshot. Both, maybe, Quincy replied, dousing the small fire. Either way, we'd best push on to that creek. I'll feel better with water at our back for the night. As they resumed their journey, Tessa remained in Quincy's wagon with Emma, the earlier pretense creating a new awareness between them. They had presented themselves as a family without discussion, each instinctively following the other's lead. That evening, as they made camp beside the promised creek, Quincy set about creating a more defensible position than usual. He circled the wagons close together, positioned the cattle in a natural depression where they could be easily monitored, and gathered extra firewood. "Do you think they'll be back?" Tessa asked quietly as she prepared their evening meal. Quincy checked his revolver before returning it to his holster. "Can't say, but best to be prepared." They ate dinner with conversation that purposely avoided the afternoon's encounter, instead sharing stories of their childhood's. Quincy's in rural Ohio, Tessa's in western Pennsylvania. As night deepened and Emma slept soundly in her cradle, Tessa brought out her harmonica again. The melody she played this time was unfamiliar to Quincy, something lilting and bittersweet. "My mother's favorite," she explained when she finished. She said it reminded her of the hills where she grew up. "It's beautiful," Quincy said. "Makes me think of something too far away to touch but too precious to forget." Tessa's eyes reflected the firelight as she looked at him. That's exactly how she described it. An owl called from the darkness beyond their camp, and both turned toward the sound. The momentary distraction broke the intensity of their shared gaze, but the connection remained, deepening like a slow river finding its course. "I should thank you," Tessa said after a while. "For what?" "For letting me be your wife today." Her smile was gentle with a hint of teasing. Even if it was just pretend, Quincy's expression remained serious. "It was quick thinking on both our parts. Those men," he shook his head, "they weren't just passing through." "I know," Tessa said. "The way they looked at the cattle, at our supplies, they were taking inventory." "You noticed that too?" It wasn't a question. "I've learned to watch people carefully these past months," Tessa said. "When Thomas and I first set out, we were too trusting, paid for it dearly outside of Cheyenne." Quincy raised an eyebrow in question. "We were robbed," she explained. "Two men who'd shared our fire the night before, they took most of our money and Thomas's good rifle, left us our wagon and food at least." "I'm sorry that happened to you," Tessa shrugged. "It taught me to be more cautious. Though I must admit, I trusted you rather quickly." She looked at him curiously. "I'm still not entirely sure why." Quincy considered this. "Maybe because neither of us has much left to lose except what matters most." He glanced toward the sleeping Emma. "Makes a person's priorities clear." "Yes," Tessa agreed softly. "Very clear." That night, Quincy insisted on taking watch, settling against a wagon wheel with his rifle across his lap. Tessa retired to her wagon but left the canvas flap open toward the fire. "Wake me for the second watch," she called softly. "I can handle a rifle too, you know." Quincy's mouth quirked in a half-smile. "Somehow that doesn't surprise me, Miss Vaughn." The night passed without incident, though Quincy did wake Tessa for the pre-dawn hours, accepting that they were truly partners in this journey now. When he woke to the smell of coffee and biscuits, he found Tessa had already fed and changed Emma and was bouncing her gently while tending the breakfast fire. The domestic scene struck him with unexpected force, not just for its practicality, but for how right it felt. "Hope you don't mind," Tessa said, noticing his gaze. "She was awake and you needed rest." "I don't mind at all," Quincy replied, accepting the cup of coffee she offered. "She seems to like you." "The feeling is mutual," Tessa said, smiling down at the baby. "She has your eyes, you know." Same thoughtful expression. "Her mother always said the same thing." Quincy's voice held an old pain, but not as raw as before. Their journey continued over the next several days, falling into a comfortable rhythm. During the day, they traveled steadily northwest, alternating who drove the lead wagon and who managed the cattle. At night, they made camp early enough to establish proper defenses, share a meal, and exchange stories of their former lives. Each evening ended with music, Quincy's lullaby for Emma, accompanied by Tessa's harmonica, followed by other songs they both knew or taught each other. Their voices blended with increasing harmony, a metaphor neither mentioned but both recognized. On the fifth night of their journey, they camped near a small lake nestled in a valley of pines. The location offered natural protection and the luxury of fresh water for bathing. After dinner, Tessa excused herself to take advantage of this rare opportunity, walking to a secluded cove with soap and towel in hand. Quincy remained at camp with Emma, deliberately occupying himself with mending harnesses to give Tessa privacy. When she returned, her hair was damp and loose around her shoulders, falling in auburn waves that caught the firelight. "Your turn if you'd like," she offered, reaching for Emma. "I'll watch her." Quincy hesitated only briefly before nodding his thanks. The prospect of washing away days of trail dust was too tempting to refuse. The cool water was invigorating, and Quincy took his time, swimming a few strokes before scrubbing himself clean. As he dressed in fresh clothes, he found himself considering his appearance in a way he hadn't in months, running fingers through his dark hair to order it, making sure his beard was neatly trimmed. When he returned to camp, he found Tessa sitting by the fire with Emma in her lap, singing softly while combing out her long hair. The scene struck him with such unexpected yearning that he stopped at the edge of the firelight, suddenly uncertain. Tessa looked up, her song trailing off. "Feel better? Like a new man," he admitted, moving to join them. "Thank you for watching her. It's my pleasure." Tessa's hands continued their gentle work with the comb. "She's fascinated by hair, keeps trying to grab it." "She's at that age, everything goes straight to the mouth," Quincy said with a chuckle. They sat in comfortable silence for a while, the only sounds the crackling fire and Emma's occasional happy gurgle. The night was clear, stars scattered like silver dust across the dark sky. "My father used to say that stars are windows in heaven," Tessa said, following his gaze upward, "that our loved ones look down through them to check on us." "I like that thought," Quincy said softly. "Think Elizabeth would be pleased with how Emma's growing." "I'm certain of it," Tessa replied without hesitation. "She's thriving, Quincy. You've done well by her." It was the first time she had used his given name without the formality of Mr. Foster, and the intimacy of it hung in the air between them. "Do you think?" He paused, gathering his thoughts. "Do you think it dishonors her memory to consider a future that she isn't part of?" Tessa was quiet for a long moment, her fingers stilling in her hair. "I think love doesn't diminish when we carry it forward," she finally said. "It expands. Elizabeth will always be Emma's mother. Nothing changes that, but life continues." Their eyes met across the firelight, a current of understanding flowing between them. "Yes," Quincy agreed softly. "It does." That night, after Emma was asleep and they had retired to their separate sleeping places, Tessa in her wagon, Quincy by the fire, a wolf howled in the distant hills. The sound carried across the valley, lonesome and haunting. Another wolf answered, and then another, a chorus of wild voices finding each other in the darkness. Quincy lay awake, listening to their calls, thinking of connections found and lost and found again. When sleep finally claimed him, his dreams were filled with harmony, music, and voices twining together beneath a canopy of stars. Morning brought low clouds and the threat of rain. They broke camp quickly, hoping to make significant progress before the weather turned. By mid-morning, a light drizzle had begun, not heavy enough to halt their travel but persistent enough to dampen spirits. "There's an old line shack about 10 miles ahead," Quincy called to Tessa as they traveled. "Used to belong to the Baxter spread before they went under. Might be a good place to wait out the weather if it worsens." Tessa nodded, pulling her shawl tighter around her shoulders. Emma was secure in the wagon beside her, protected from the elements by an oilcloth canopy Quincy had rigged. The rain intensified as the morning wore on, turning from drizzle to steady downpour. By the time they reached the line shack, a sturdy, if rustic, single-room cabin, both were thoroughly soaked despite their rain gear. "Get Emma inside," Quincy directed as he quickly unhitched the teams. "I'll see to the animals." Tessa hurried into the cabin with the baby and their essential supplies. The interior was dusty but sound, with a small iron stove, a rough-hewn table with 2 chairs, and a narrow bed frame with a straw-filled mattress. She quickly built a fire in the stove, spreading Emma's blankets near it to create a warm space for the baby. By the time Quincy entered, dripping wet but satisfied the livestock were securely sheltered in the attached lean-to, Tessa had the cabin relatively organized. "This rain isn't letting up anytime soon," he observed, removing his sodden coat and hat. "Probably best to stay put until morning." Tessa nodded, busy heating water for coffee. "It's cozy enough in here." Emma seems content. Indeed, the baby was happily playing with a wooden spoon Tessa had given her, entirely unbothered by their change in routine. "Here," Tessa said, handing Quincy a towel she'd found among their supplies. "You're dripping all over." "Thanks." He dried his hair and face, suddenly aware of their close proximity in the small cabin. The domesticity of the situation, the three of them sharing this intimate space, felt both natural and startlingly new. They spent the day in quiet companionship, tending to small tasks that had been neglected during travel. Quincy mended tack and cleaned his firearms while Tessa darned stockings and reorganized their food supplies. Emma napped and played by turns, content in the warm, dry cabin. Outside, the rain continued unabated, drumming steadily on the cabin's roof and transforming the surrounding prairie into a sea of mud. By evening, it was clear they would indeed be staying the night. "You and Emma take the bed," Quincy said as they finished their simple dinner of beans and biscuits. "I'll make do by the stove." Tessa looked at the narrow bed frame dubiously. "There's barely room for one adult and a baby, let alone two grown people." "All the more reason for you to have it," Quincy insisted. "I've slept on harder ground than this floor." Tessa began to protest further, then smiled ruefully. "You're a gentleman, Quincy Foster. Your mother raised you right." "She tried her best," he agreed with a small smile. As night deepened, the rain finally began to ease, though water still dripped steadily from the eaves. Quincy banked the stove for the night while Tessa settled Emma in the center of the bed, surrounding her with pillows to prevent her from rolling. "She'll sleep through now," Quincy predicted, watching his daughter's peaceful face. "Rain always settles her." "She's a good baby," Tessa observed. "Some would be screaming the place down after a day like today. She adapts well, better than I do sometimes." Tessa looked at him thoughtfully. "You've adapted remarkably well to life as a widowed father. Don't sell yourself short." The genuine admiration in her voice warmed him more than the stove had. "I had no choice but to manage, for her sake." "There's always a choice," Tessa countered gently. "Many men would have given her to relatives to raise, or found a new wife immediately out of necessity. You chose to keep her with you, to be both mother and father. That speaks to your character." Quincy was silent for a moment, touched by her understanding. "Thank you for seeing it that way." As Tessa prepared for bed, Quincy made his own bed on the floor, using his saddle as a pillow and his bedroll for warmth. The cabin was quiet save for the occasional pop from the stove and the soft patter of diminishing rainfall. "Quincy," Tessa's voice came softly through the darkness. "Yes." "Would you sing for her? For Emma, I know she's sleeping, but—" "Of course." His deep voice filled the small space with the now familiar lullaby. As always, Tessa's voice joined his after the first verse, their harmony as natural as breathing. When the song ended, neither spoke for several minutes, letting the resonance of their blended voices linger in the cabin. "Tessa," Quincy finally said, using her given name deliberately. "Yes, I'm glad you joined my song that night, by the fire." In the darkness, he couldn't see her smile, but he could hear it in her voice. "So am I, Quincy, so am I." The rain cleared by morning, leaving behind a washed, clean world of glistening grass and puddles reflecting the blue sky. They set out early, both aware that their journey together was more than halfway complete. Virginia City was perhaps a week away now, barring further delays. The landscape began to change as they traveled northwest, the flat prairie giving way to rolling hills and the distant promise of mountains on the horizon. Game was plentiful, allowing Quincy to supplement their meals with fresh rabbit and once, a young deer. They encountered other travelers, occasionally a family in a covered wagon heading for Oregon, a pair of prospectors returning from the goldfields, a cavalry patrol tracking a group of horse thieves. Each encounter reinforced their partnership, as they naturally presented themselves as a family traveling together. On the 8th night of their journey, they camped at the base of a ridge that offered shelter from the wind and a clear view of the surrounding landscape. After dinner, as Emma played on a blanket between them, Tessa brought out a small book from her trunk. I thought perhaps. She hesitated. Would you like me to read aloud? It was Thomas's favorite, The Last of the Mohicans. We were taking turns reading it during our journey. Quincy nodded, settling back against his saddle. I'd like that. Tessa's voice was expressive as she read, bringing Cooper's adventure to life in the flickering firelight. Quincy found himself watching her as much as listening the animated expressions that crossed her face, the gentle strength in her hands as she turned the pages, the occasional glance she cast toward Emma to ensure the baby was content. When she paused to rest her voice, Quincy offered quietly, "You'd make a wonderful teacher. You have a gift for bringing words to life." Tessa looked surprised, then pleased. I actually taught school for 2 years back home, before my parents fell ill and needed care. I thought you might have, Quincy said. You have that patient way of explaining things. I loved teaching, she admitted. Perhaps someday when I'm settled. The thought hung between them, unfinished. What did settled mean for either of them now? The question seemed increasingly complex with each passing day. That night, their usual musical exchange expanded beyond the lullaby. Quincy surprised Tessa by singing Barbara Allen, a ballad his grandmother had taught him. Tessa countered with The Water is Wide, her clear voice carrying the melancholy tune across the prairie night. As their impromptu concert concluded, Quincy found himself seated closer to Tessa than when they had begun, drawn by the intimacy of shared music. Emma had fallen asleep between them on the blanket, one tiny hand curled trustingly around Tessa's finger. She's getting attached to you, Quincy observed softly. Children do that, Tessa replied, gently freeing her finger without waking the baby. They love freely without reservation. And adults, Tessa met his gaze steadily. Adults carry more scars, makes us cautious. But not incapable, Quincy suggested, his voice deepening. No, she agreed quietly, not incapable. The moment stretched between them, weighted with unspoken possibilities. Finally, Tessa broke the silence, standing to gather Emma into her arms. It's getting late. I should put her in her cradle. Quincy nodded, rising as well. As Tessa carefully transferred the sleeping baby to her makeshift bed, he found himself imagining a different future than the solitary one he had envisioned, when leaving Nebraska, one where campfires and lullabies were shared, where Emma knew a mother's love again, where he himself might find companionship in more than just memories. The thought both exhilarated and terrified him. The next day brought unexpected challenges. As they forded a swollen creek, one of Quincy's wagon wheels caught on a submerged log, tipping the wagon dangerously. Only quick action, Quincy leaping into the water to free the wheel while Tessa managed the team, prevented disaster. By the time they reached the opposite bank, both were soaked and exhausted, but the wagons and cattle were safe. They made early camp to dry their belongings and recover from the ordeal. That was quick thinking with the team, Quincy acknowledged as they hung sodden blankets near the fire. Not many would keep their head like that. Tessa wrung water from her skirt, embarrassed but pleased by the compliment. Growing up on a farm has its advantages, though I admit my heart was in my throat when I saw you go under that water. The concern in her voice was unmistakable, and Quincy felt a surge of warmth that had nothing to do with the fire. It would take more than a creek to separate me from Emma, he said, glancing toward where his daughter sat contently in her dry cradle, having slept through the entire incident. And more than a creek to separate you from those cattle, Tessa added with a knowing smile. I saw how you were eyeing them when the wagon tipped, Quincy chuckled. Can't deny it, they represent Emma's future. You're a good provider, Tessa said simply. A good father. Her words carried no artifice, just honest appreciation that touched him deeply. As twilight settled around them, the day's drama behind them, they sat close together by the fire, letting its warmth drive the remaining chill from their bones. Conversation flowed easily between them, touching on childhood memories, favorite books, dreams once held and abandoned. "I used to want to see the ocean," Tessa confided. "Thomas and I talked about continuing west after Virginia City, maybe all the way to San Francisco." "And now?" Quincy asked. She was quiet for a moment, watching the flames. "Now I think I'd be content with a place that feels like home. Somewhere Emma could run free, where there's good water and fertile soil. A place to put down roots." "That sounds like a fine dream," Quincy said softly. Their eyes met, and for a breathless moment, Quincy thought he might lean forward, closing the small distance between them. But Emma chose that moment to wake, her hungry cry breaking the spell. As Tessa helped prepare the baby's evening bottle, she found herself wondering what might have happened if Emma had slept a few minutes longer. The thought both thrilled and unsettled her. That night, as she lay in her wagon listening to Quincy's deep, even breathing from his bedroll by the fire, Tessa acknowledged the truth she had been avoiding. She was falling in love with this quiet, honorable man and his precious daughter. The realization brought no simple joy, only complicated questions. Their journey together would end soon. She had her uncle waiting in Virginia City. Quincy had his own plans. Whatever connection had grown between them on the trail might not survive the return to civilization. The thought left her sleepless long into the night. Morning brought no clarity, only the practical demands of the trail. They traveled in companionable silence for much of the day, each lost in private thoughts. By late afternoon, they reached a small settlement, little more than a trading post, livery stable, and saloon, the first outpost of civilization they'd encountered in days. "Might be good to replenish supplies," Quincy suggested as they approached, "and get news of the trail ahead." Tessa agreed, though she felt a strange reluctance to rejoin even this small pocket of society. Their time alone on the trail had created a world of their own making, one that outside forces might easily disrupt. The trading post was rustic but well-stocked. While Quincy negotiated for coffee, flour, and ammunition, Tessa browsed the limited selection of dry goods. A small display of hair ribbons caught her eye, a frivolous item she would normally ignore, but today seemed suddenly important. "Pretty things for a pretty lady," observed the shopkeeper's wife, a kind-faced woman with gray-streaked hair. "That blue one would suit you." Tessa fingered the ribbon thoughtfully. "It's lovely, but I shouldn't." "Your husband won't mind the expense," the woman said with a knowing smile, glancing toward where Quincy stood at the counter. "Men like seeing their wives take pleasure in small things." Tessa didn't correct the assumption. "Perhaps you're right." She selected the ribbon, adding it to their purchases. It was an indulgence, but one that felt significant, a small acknowledgement of womanhood after weeks of practical survival. That evening, camped a few miles beyond the settlement, Tessa wore the ribbon in her hair. She had said nothing about it, simply appearing at the fireside with her auburn locks neatly braided and tied with the blue silk. Quincy noticed immediately, his eyes lingering on the splash of color against her hair. "That's pretty," he said quietly. "The blue suits you." "Thank you," she replied, pleased by his notice. It seemed a small extravagance after so much practicality. "Sometimes small extravagances are what remind us we're living, not just surviving," Quincy observed, passing her a cup of coffee. Their fingers brushed during the exchange, a brief contact that neither hurried to break. When they finally moved apart, something had shifted between them, an acknowledgement, perhaps, of desires beyond the basic needs that had defined their journey thus far. After dinner, as Emma played contentedly on her blanket, Quincy surprised Tessa by producing a small package wrapped in brown paper. "What's this?" she asked, accepting it with curiosity. "Just a small thing I saw at the trading post," he said, suddenly self-conscious. "Thought you might like it." Tessa unwrapped the package carefully to reveal a small wooden comb, hand-carved with a design of flowing leaves. "It's beautiful," she whispered, running her fingers over the intricate pattern. "Reminded me of your harmonica playing," Quincy explained. "Something about the way the leaves flow like music." The thoughtfulness of the gift touched her deeply. "Thank you, Quincy, I'll treasure it." Their eyes held for a long moment, the firelight casting warm shadows across their faces. This time, it was Tessa who leaned forward slightly, an almost imperceptible movement that Quincy answered by closing the remaining distance between them. The kiss was gentle, questioning a first exploration of feelings that had been building since that night when her voice had joined his lullaby. When they pulled apart, both were slightly breathless, surprised by the intensity of such a simple contact. "I didn't plan that," Quincy said quietly. "Nor I," Tessa admitted, "but I'm not sorry, neither am I." His voice was rough with emotion. "But Tessa, I don't want to mislead you. I'm not sure what future I can offer beyond Virginia City. Emma and I, we're still finding our way. I'm not asking for promises," she assured him. She glanced down at the comb in her hands. "I just know that these past weeks have meant something to me, something important." "To me as well," Quincy acknowledged. "More than I expected, more than I thought possible again." Emma chose that moment to vocalize loudly, demanding attention. Both adults laughed, the tension of the moment breaking. "She has excellent timing," Tessa observed wryly. "Always has," Quincy agreed, lifting his daughter. "Ready for your song, little one?" That night, their lullaby carried new meaning, a harmony not just of voices but of hearts beginning to find their way toward each other. The next day's travel was accompanied by a new awareness between them, small glances and casual touches carrying added significance. They spoke little of the kiss, instead letting their growing closeness express itself in practical ways, Quincy helping Tessa down from her wagon with hands that lingered slightly longer than necessary. Tessa preparing Quincy's coffee exactly as he preferred without being asked. By nightfall, they had reached the foothills that marked the final approach to Virginia City. The mountains loomed ahead, promising both journey's end and new beginnings. 2 more days, I reckon, Quincy estimated as they made camp. Maybe 3 if the pass is difficult. Tessa nodded, feeling a strange mixture of anticipation and regret. "My uncle's house is on the eastern edge of town near the church. At least, that's where his last letter was sent from. Sullivan's ranch is south of town," Quincy said. "About half a day's ride once the cattle are delivered to the stockyards." They were discussing logistics, but both recognized the underlying question: what happened after they reached their destinations? That evening, after Emma was asleep, they sat closer than usual by the fire, shoulders touching as they shared the last of a bottle of whiskey Quincy had purchased at the trading post. "Tell me about your uncle," Quincy requested. "The one you're going to stay with." "Uncle Henry. He's my mother's brother. A good man, though I haven't seen him in years. He came west after the war and did well for himself, owns a hardware store in Virginia City." Tessa swirled the amber liquid in her cup. "He wrote that there was a place for Thomas and me if we wanted it, a fresh start." "And now, will you still stay with him?" Tessa considered the question carefully. "I suppose I should, at least until I find my footing. He's my only family now." Quincy was quiet for a moment. "And what of Sullivan's ranch? Would there be a place there for a seamstress, do you think? Or perhaps a school teacher once they build a proper school?" The question hung in the air between them, laden with unspoken possibilities. "There might be," Tessa said softly, "if she were invited." Quincy set down his cup, turning to face her fully. "Tessa, I'm not a man who speaks easily of feelings. Elizabeth used to tease me about that, but these weeks with you..." He took a deep breath. "I never expected to find companionship again, let alone something more. Yet here you are, singing my daughter to sleep, making me laugh, helping me see beyond just surviving to actually living again." Tessa's heart quickened at his words. "Quincy, let me finish, please," he requested gently. "I know it's soon. I know we're still virtually strangers in many ways. But I also know that Emma needs a mother, and he paused, gathering courage. "I find myself needing you in my life, not just as a traveling companion or a friend, but as something more permanent." "Are you asking what I think you're asking?" Tessa whispered, hardly daring to believe. "I'm asking if you might consider, once we reach Virginia City and settle our affairs, joining Emma and me at Sullivan's ranch. Not as a seamstress or a teacher, but as my wife. As Emma's mother." The directness of his proposal took her breath away. "Quincy, we've known each other less than 3 weeks." "I know," he acknowledged. "And if you need time to consider, I understand. But life on the frontier has taught me that tomorrow isn't guaranteed. When you find something worth holding on to, you don't let it slip away." Tessa was silent for a long moment, her mind racing. Was this madness? To consider marrying a man she had known such a short time. Yet in those weeks, she had seen Quincy in situations that revealed his character more clearly than years of courtship in civilization might have done. She had watched him care for his daughter with unfailing tenderness, treat her with unfailing respect, face dangers with unfailing courage, and she had felt her heart open to him and to Emma in ways she had thought impossible after the losses she had endured. "Yes," she said finally, her voice steady despite the emotion welling within her. "Yes, I will marry you, Quincy Foster." The joy that transformed his face was answer enough, but he gathered her in his arms nonetheless, his kiss a promise more binding than any words could be. When they finally parted, breathless and smiling, Tessa laid her head against his shoulder, watching the stars wheel overhead. "Elizabeth would approve, I think," she said softly, "of you finding happiness again, of Emma having a mother." Quincy's arm tightened around her. "I believe she would." She was never one to dwell in sorrow. They sat together by the dying fire, planning their future in quiet voices, a simple wedding in Virginia City once they arrived, a home to build on Sullivan's land, dreams of more children to join Emma as the years passed. It was well past midnight when they finally retired to their separate sleeping places for what they both knew would be among the last times. Soon, they would no longer need to maintain the proprieties of the trail. Soon, they would truly be a family. The final days of their journey passed in a golden haze of anticipation. The terrain grew more challenging as they entered the mountain pass, but even the difficulties seemed manageable now that they faced them with the certainty of a shared future. On the afternoon of the third day, they crested a ridge and saw Virginia City spread below them in the valley, a bustling frontier town of wooden buildings and busy streets, smoke rising from numerous chimneys against the backdrop of mountains. "There it is," Quincy said, drawing his wagon to a halt beside Tessa's. "Journey's End." Tessa reached across the space between their wagons to take his hand, and beginning. They entered town as the sun was setting, drawing curious glances from townspeople not accustomed to seeing a family traveling with a small cattle herd. Quincy directed them to the livery stable first, arranging for the cattle to be penned temporarily until he could deliver them to Sullivan in the morning. "My uncle's house should be this way," Tessa said, pointing toward the eastern edge of town, near the white church steeple. They found the modest but well-maintained house easily enough. Henry Vaughn, a barrel-chested man with Tessa's auburn hair now streaked with gray, was visibly shocked when he opened his door to find his niece on his porch with a man, a baby, and 2 wagons of possessions. "Tessa." "Good Lord, girl, I was beginning to think you weren't coming," he exclaimed, enfolding her in a bear hug before stepping back with a puzzled expression. "But where's Thomas, and who is this?" The difficult explanation of Thomas's death cast a momentary shadow over their arrival, but Henry's genuine grief and warm welcome to Quincy, and Emma soon restored a sense of celebration. "So you two met on the trail and decided to marry," he summarized after hearing their story. "Well, I'll be. That's frontier romance for you." "I know it seems sudden," Tessa began, but her uncle waved away her concern. "Sudden? Girl, your own mother agreed to marry your father after knowing him just 2 weeks. Said she recognized a good man when she saw one and wasn't about to let him get away." Henry clapped Quincy on the shoulder. "From what you've told me, you're cut from the same cloth. Welcome to the family, Foster." Over a hearty dinner in Henry's comfortable kitchen, they discussed their plans. Henry insisted they stay with him until the wedding, which he offered to host at his home. The minister comes through town every other Sunday, he informed them. Do this weekend as it happens, perfect timing if you're not set on waiting. Quincy glanced at Tessa, who nodded her agreement. This Sunday would be perfect, she confirmed. Excellent, Henry beamed. Now, Foster, you said you're delivering cattle to Jim Sullivan tomorrow. That's right. He's expecting me. Good man, Sullivan. His wife Emily is one of the finest women in the territory. She'll be delighted to hear you're settling nearby. They've been hoping to establish a proper community out that way. The conversation continued late into the evening, until Emma's increasingly fussy behavior signaled bedtime for all. Henry showed them to separate rooms, Quincy and Emma in the small guest room, Tessa in what would have been Thomas's room, with a wink and a reminder that propriety matters until Sunday. The next morning, Quincy rose early to deliver the cattle to Sullivan. Before he left, he and Tessa shared a quiet moment on Henry's front porch. Will you tell Sullivan about us? Tessa asked. About our plans? I will, Quincy promised. I want to make sure there's housing ready for us, even if it's just a line shack to start. I won't bring you to nothing. Tessa touched his face gently. I'd live in a tent with you and Emma if needed. Don't worry so much. He caught her hand, pressing a kiss to her palm. 4 days until Sunday, he murmured. Seems a lifetime. We've waited this long, she reminded him with a smile. A few more days won't hurt us. But as she watched him ride away, leading the cattle herd that had been their excuse for meeting, Tessa felt a pang of separation that surprised her with its intensity. In just 3 weeks, this man and his daughter had become essential to her happiness. The days leading up to Sunday passed in a flurry of preparation. Henry introduced Tessa to his friends and neighbors, proudly explaining her impending marriage. The women of Virginia City, starved for new company and a reason to celebrate, embraced Tessa warmly, offering help with wedding preparations and practical advice about married life on the frontier. Quincy returned from Sullivan's ranch with good news. Not only was his cattle payment generous, but Sullivan had offered them use of a recently vacated foreman's cabin on his property. It was small but solidly built, with 2 rooms and a good well nearby. It's a start, Quincy told Tessa as they walked along Virginia City's Main Street the evening before their wedding. Emma was contentedly cradled in his arms, fascinated by the sights and sounds of the busy town. Sullivan says we can add on as needed, maybe build something more substantial next spring. It sounds perfect, Tessa assured him, slipping her hand into his free one. When can we see it? Tomorrow, after the ceremony. Sullivan's wife, Emily, has already been there, putting in some basic furnishings and supplies. She says it's her wedding gift to us. That's incredibly kind, considering she's never even met me. Good people recognize other good people, Quincy said simply. And you, Tessa Vaughn, are the best person I know. The church was filled to capacity on Sunday morning, partly from regular attendees, partly from curious townspeople eager to witness the hasty marriage of Henry Vaughn's newly arrived niece to the cattle driver who had brought her to town. Tessa wore a simple blue dress that Henry had insisted on purchasing for her, with her hair arranged in an elegant knot secured by the wooden comb Quincy had given her. Emma, dressed in a clean white gown sewn by one of Henry's neighbors, was passed among the women of the congregation, who cooed and fussed over her as if she were their own. When the circuit riding minister called them forward, Quincy took Tessa's hand, his eyes never leaving hers as they spoke their vows. The words were traditional, but the meaning behind them was anything but conventional, a promise forged in shared hardship and unexpected joy, in lullabies by campfires and courage on the trail. I now pronounce you man and wife, the minister declared. Mr. Foster, you may kiss your bride. Their kiss was brief but heartfelt, mindful of the watching congregation yet unmistakably genuine. As they turned to face their well-wishers, Emma reached for Tessa from the arms of the neighbor who held her. I think she approves, Quincy murmured, smiling as Tessa gathered their daughter into her embrace. The celebration afterward at Henry's house was jubilant, with food and music lasting well into the afternoon. When it was time to depart for their new home, the entire town seemed to gather to see them off, showering them with good wishes and practical gifts. "You'll come back to visit your old uncle, won't you?" Henry asked as he helped load the last of their belongings into the wagon. "Of course," Tessa promised, embracing him tightly. "And you'll come to us for Christmas? Wouldn't miss it for the world," he assured her. "You've found a good man, Tessa. Your parents would be proud." The journey to Sullivan's ranch took less than 3 hours. As they crested the final hill, Quincy pointed to a small cabin nestled among pine trees near a stream. "There it is," he said softly. "Our home." Tessa felt her heart swell at the sight. It was modest, certainly a simple log structure with a stone chimney and small porch, but it represented everything she had thought lost when Thomas died. Family, security, a place to belong. Sullivan and his wife Emily met them at the cabin, welcoming Tessa warmly and showing them the preparations. They had made a proper bed with fresh linens, a handcrafted cradle for Emma, a pantry stocked with basics, and even curtains at the windows. "It's not much," Emily apologized, "but it's a start." "It's perfect," Tessa assured her, already envisioning the home they would create together. After the Sullivans departed, promising to give them a few days to settle in before expecting Quincy to begin his new duties as assistant ranch manager, the little family was finally alone. Quincy carried their bags inside while Tessa settled Emma, who was overtired from the excitement of the day. When the baby finally slept in her new cradle, Tessa joined Quincy on the small porch where he sat watching the sunset paint the mountains gold. "Happy?" he asked as she settled beside him on the rough-hewn bench. "Very," she confirmed, leaning against his shoulder. "Though it still seems like a dream sometimes. 3 weeks ago I was alone in the world except for a broken wagon and painful memories. And now I have a husband, a daughter, and a home." She turned to face him, her eyes reflecting the last golden light of day. "I have a future again, Quincy. We all do." He kissed her then, no longer constrained by propriety or the presence of others. When they finally parted, breathless and smiling, the first stars were appearing in the deepening blue of the sky. "Should we put Emma to bed properly?" Quincy suggested, his voice husky with emotion and anticipation. Tessa nodded, taking his hand as they rose to enter their home, no longer separate travelers sharing a campfire, but a family beginning their life together. That night, after they had loved each other with the passion of new discovery tempered by genuine affection, they lay together in their marriage bed, talking quietly of dreams and plans for their future. When Emma woke hungry in the small hours, Quincy rose to fetch her bottle, bringing her to their bed. As he began to sing the familiar lullaby, Tessa's voice joined his in perfect harmony, just as it had that first night by the campfire. Emma's eyes drooped as she drank her milk, soothed by the blended voices of her father and her new mother. "I think she remembers," Tessa whispered when the baby had fallen back to sleep between them. "That first night when I joined your song." "I know I'll never forget it," Quincy replied, gently stroking Emma's dark hair. "The moment my heart started beating again." In the years that followed, their life together unfolded with all the challenges and joys of frontier existence. The cabin expanded room by room as their family grew, first with the arrival of Thomas Henry Foster less than a year after their marriage, then with twin girls, Elizabeth and Mary, 2 years later. Quincy eventually became foreman of Sullivan's Ranch, while Tessa established a small school that served the children of ranch workers and nearby homesteaders. Their home became known for its hospitality, its music, and the laughter that seemed to fill every corner. On warm summer evenings, neighbors would gather on their expanded porch to share food and stories. Inevitably, someone would request music, and Quincy and Tessa would oblige he with his deep baritone, she with her clear soprano and skilled harmonica playing. Their children joined in as they grew, creating family harmonies that became legendary in the valley. And every night, without fail, no matter how busy or tired they might be, they sang their special lullaby together, the song that had first joined their voices and their hearts on a lonely Montana night, when a widowed cowboy sang his baby to sleep alone, and a woman joined his song and became his wife.